The candle had been burning for 3 weeks before my hands started shaking. I didn't make the connection right away. Why would I? It was a beautiful candle. Dark green glass, the kind you see in the window of a high-end shop on Spark Street, and think, who actually buys these? My daughter did, apparently. She'd driven up from Hamilton for my 63rd birthday, walked through the door with a bottle of Niagara Riesling and that candle wrapped in craft paper and a velvet ribbon, and she'd smiled the way she used to smile when she was 12 and proud of herself. "It's cedar and black spruce," she said. "Very Canadian. I thought you'd like it." I did like it. I set it on the mantel in the living room and lit it that same evening after she left. The scent was strong, but not unpleasant, like standing in a forest after rain. My wife Diane had passed 3 years earlier, and the house had felt too quiet since then. The candle made it feel inhabited again. I burned it every night. By the end of October, I had a headache that wouldn't go away. I'm not someone who complains about his health. 31 years working construction in Ottawa will either make you ignore your body or break you completely, and I chose the first option. A headache was nothing. I drank more water, took some Advil, went to bed early. But the headache didn't respond to any of that. It sat behind my eyes like something with weight. Then came the fatigue. Not tiredness. I know tiredness. This was different. I'd wake up after 8 hours of sleep and feel like I hadn't slept at all. I'd stand at the kitchen counter waiting for the coffee to finish and have to grip the edge just to stay steady. I was 63, not 90. I'd been healthy my whole life. I still walk the Rado Trail on weekends. This didn't make sense. My family doctor ran the standard blood work in November. Everything came back unremarkable, she said. Blood pressure slightly elevated, but nothing alarming. She asked if I was eating well, sleeping well, managing stress. I told her yes to all three. She said sometimes the body just slows down. She said it like it was obvious. I drove home feeling like I'd been dismissed. By December, I'd lost 11 pounds. I hadn't tried to. Food had started tasting wrong. Not bad exactly, just muted, like eating with a head cold that never cleared. I told myself it was grief, delayed grief, the kind that apparently surfaces years later. I'd read something about that once. I told myself a lot of things. My daughter called every Sunday. She always asked the same thing. "You're still burning the candle, right? I want to know you're using it." I told her yes, of course. I liked it. It relaxed me. "Good," she said. "Good." I didn't think anything of it at the time. She'd always been attentive. After her mother died, she'd stepped into a kind of caretaking role, calling regularly, showing up for holidays, making sure I wasn't disappearing into myself. I appreciated it. I thought it was love. January was brutal that year, even by Ottawa standards. I stopped walking the trail because my legs felt unreliable on ice, and truthfully, I wasn't sure I had the energy for it anyway. I was spending most evenings in the armchair by the fireplace, candle burning on the mantel, reading the same paragraph in whatever book I was holding and retaining nothing. My vision had started doing something strange, not blurring exactly, but losing precision at the edges, like a photograph slightly out of focus. I went back to my doctor. She referred me to a neurologist. The neurologist was thorough. MRI, cognitive assessments, a full panel of tests that took 3 appointments to complete. He called me in for the results on a Thursday afternoon. He sat across from me and said everything looked normal. No lesions, no markers for anything degenerative, no explanation he could give me with confidence. He said sometimes symptoms like mine, the fatigue, the headaches, the cognitive fog, plastered together without a clear cause. He said the word idiopathic, which I'd learned by then meant they had no idea. I sat in the parking lot of the hospital on Smythe Road for 40 minutes before I drove home. That evening I lit the candle. I don't know why. Habit, maybe, or some stubborn refusal to change anything while I waited to understand what was happening. The house smelled like cedar and black spruce, and I sat in the armchair and thought about Diane, and thought about the fact that I was 63 years old and apparently falling apart for no reason anyone could name. The furnace repairman came in February. His name was Walter. He was a compact, quiet man in his mid-50s who'd been servicing furnaces in the Glebe neighborhood for decades. My neighbor across the street had recommended him after my own furnace started making a sound I didn't like. Walter arrived at 7:30 in the morning. Work boots, no fuss, went straight downstairs. I offered him coffee. He said he was fine. He was down there for about 40 minutes. I heard him moving around. Heard tools, heard nothing that alarmed me. Then I heard him come up the stairs and stop. I was in the kitchen. I looked over and he was standing in the doorway between the hall and the living room, not moving. He was staring at the mantel. "Sir," he said, and his voice had changed from the flat, professional tone he'd used when he arrived. "What is that candle?" I told him my daughter had given it to me. "Cedar and black spruce," I said, "a birthday gift." He walked past me into the living room and leaned forward to look at it without touching it. He tilted his head slightly. He smelled the air near it. "Has this been burning regularly?" he asked. I said yes, most evenings, since early October. He straightened up and looked at me directly. "With respect," he said, "I think you need to stop burning this immediately and open every window in this house." I asked him why. He said he'd spent 30 years working in enclosed spaces, basements, boiler rooms, old houses with bad ventilation, and he'd learned to recognize the smell of certain chemicals because his own health had depended on it. He said what he was smelling wasn't cedar and spruce, not primarily. There was something underneath it. He said he wasn't a chemist, he couldn't name it, but he'd smelled something similar once before in a house where the owner had been burning treated wood indoors and had ended up in hospital. He said, "I could be wrong, but I don't think you should wait to find out." I stood in my own living room and looked at that candle on the mantel and tried to make sense of what he'd just told me. It had been a gift from my daughter. She had wrapped it herself. She had driven 4 hours round trip to bring it to me. I opened the windows. I put the candle in a Ziploc bag and sealed it. I didn't throw it away. Something in me already understood that I might need it later, though I couldn't quite let myself follow that thought to where it was going. Walter finished with the furnace, charged me his standard rate, and before he left he said quietly that he hoped he'd been wrong and that I'd feel better soon. He shook my hand and walked to his van and didn't say anything further. I stood on the porch in the February cold, watching him go, and I felt the ground shifting under me in a way that had nothing to do with ice. I took the candle to a testing lab the following week. There's a private environmental testing service on Maryville Road that does air quality and material analysis for contractors and homeowners dealing with renovation concerns, mold, that sort of thing. I called ahead, explained what I had, and they told me to bring it in sealed. The man who took my report form asked me why I suspected a problem. I said I wasn't sure. I said I'd been ill. The results came back 10 days later. The candle wax contained a compound that the lab report described in technical language I had to read 3 times to understand. It was a synthetic substance, not naturally occurring, not something that belonged in a candle. When burned, it released vapor that accumulated in enclosed spaces. Prolonged exposure, the levels consistent with regular indoor use over several weeks, could cause exactly what I'd been experiencing: headaches, fatigue, weight loss, neurological symptoms, blurred vision. The lab technician I spoke with on the phone said she'd never seen it in a candle before. She said it had to have been put there deliberately. She said, "You should call the police." I sat at my kitchen table with the phone in my hand for a long time after I hung up. My daughter, my only child. She had stood in my doorway on my birthday with a bottle of wine and this gift, and smiled her mother's smile, and asked me 3 months later, every Sunday, whether I was still burning it. I called my brother first. He's 4 years younger than me, lives in Kanata. We've been close our whole lives. I told him everything. He went quiet for a long time, and then he said, "What do you need from me?" I said I needed him to sit next to me when I called the police because I wasn't sure I could do it alone. He was at my door in 35 minutes. The detective who handled the case was professional and careful, and she told me early on that these investigations moved slowly and that I should be patient and not contact my daughter until they advised otherwise. They executed a search warrant on my daughter's home in Hamilton. I don't know everything they found. What I was eventually told was that they found documentation, financial documentation, that established my daughter had been making inquiries about my estate for over a year before my birthday. She had met with a lawyer in Hamilton about the process of contesting a will. She had apparently believed, wrongly, that I had changed my estate planning in a way that disadvantaged her. I hadn't changed anything. The chemist who analyzed the compound told investigators it would have been difficult, but not impossible for a private individual to obtain and prepare. My daughter had worked for years in pharmaceutical manufacturing before she left that industry to start a cleaning business. She had knowledge the rest of us didn't. She was arrested in March. I didn't watch. My brother told me afterward. He'd offered to be there, but I asked him not to go either. I didn't want it witnessed like a spectacle. I wanted it to be as quiet as possible, even though nothing about it was. The charge was administering a noxious substance with intent to cause bodily harm. In Canada, under the criminal code, that carries a maximum of 14 years. A lawyer negotiated. I was not asked my opinion on the plea arrangement. I don't know that it would have mattered if I had been. She received a sentence of 6 years with eligibility for parole after a third. She would serve her time at a federal institution in Ontario. 6 years. For trying to kill her father slowly, in his own home, in a house that still smelled like her mother's cooking if you opened the right cupboard. I stayed with my brother and his wife for most of the spring. I couldn't go back to that house for a while. When I finally did, I had every room professionally cleaned and the ventilation system replaced entirely. I repainted the living room. I got rid of the armchair and the mantel, and bought a new couch and hung a photograph of the Ottawa River where the candle had sat. The physical recovery was slower than I expected. It took most of the summer for the headaches to fully stop. The fatigue lifted in stages, like weather clearing. My appetite came back in June, real appetite, not just eating because I knew I should. I walked the Red Oak Trail again for the first time in late August, and I had to stop twice and sit on the ground, not from pain, but from something I didn't have a word for. Gratitude, maybe. Disbelief. Some combination of the two that comes from surviving something you didn't know was happening while it was happening. I still see a therapist. She works out of a clinic near Bank Street, and she's very good at asking questions I don't expect. One of the things she's helped me with is the particular grief of this, which is different from ordinary grief, different from losing Diane, different from any loss I'd known before. When someone dies, you mourn who they were. This was something else. I was mourning who I'd believed my daughter to be. I was mourning 36 years of a relationship that I now had to reconsider from the beginning. Was any of it real? She asked me that question once, the therapist, not to push me toward an answer, but because it's the question I needed to say out loud before I could move through it. I still don't have a complete answer. I think some of it was real. I think she loved me in the way she was capable of loving, which turned out to be a different thing from the way I'd understood love to work. I've been honest about one other thing, with myself, if not always with others. The fear doesn't go away entirely. Not the fear of her. She's in a federal institution and I know where she is. But a more general fear that comes from having learned that a person you trusted completely was capable of something you couldn't have imagined. That fear changes how you move through the world. It makes you slower to accept things at face value. It makes you more careful with doors. But here is the thing I want to say to anyone who is hearing this and recognizing something in it, something familiar, something from their own life. The person who saw it wasn't a specialist. He wasn't a toxicologist or a detective. He was a furnace repairman from the glebe who'd spent 30 years paying attention to things other people ignored because his health had depended on it. Walter didn't save my life because he had any particular training in poisoning. He saved it because he trusted what he noticed. Trust what you notice. If something feels wrong about a gift, about a question that keeps getting asked the same way, about a symptom that no one can explain, don't explain it away. Don't tell yourself you're being dramatic. Don't wait for someone with credentials to confirm what your body is already trying to tell you. I'm 64 now. I wake up most mornings in a house that smells like nothing in particular, and I make my coffee and I look out at the street and I think, I'm still here. I'm still here. And I know what it cost to stay. That's not a small thing, not even close. I think about Walter a lot. Not in a dramatic way, the way you think about a fork in a road you almost didn't take. He came to fix a furnace. He charged me his standard rate. He had no reason to say anything about a candle on a mantel that wasn't his business. But he'd spent 30 years paying attention in rooms other people walked through without looking. And that habit, that simple, unglamorous habit of noticing, is the reason I'm here to tell this story at all. That's the part that stays with me most. Not the betrayal, though that's there too, sitting in its own corner of my chest. What stays with me is the idea that integrity doesn't always look the way we expect it to. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it's just a man who notices something wrong and says so, even when it's awkward, even when he could easily have walked past it and gone home. My daughter made choices I still don't fully understand. I've tried in therapy and in the long quiet of the house at night to trace the line from the person I raised to the person who wrapped that candle in craft paper and drove 4 hours to give it to me. I can't draw that line cleanly. What I can say is that what she did came from a place where fear of losing something, money, security, whatever she told herself it was, had grown larger than her sense of what was right. That's a slow erosion. It doesn't happen overnight, and I don't think she woke up one morning a different person. I think she made a series of small decisions to look away from her own conscience, and then one very large one. I'm not saying that to excuse it. There is no excuse. I'm saying it because I think it's true, and because the truth of it is more useful to me than rage. What I've had to rebuild, and it has been a rebuilding, the kind that takes longer than you think it should, is my trust in my own judgment. That's the quiet casualty of something like this. You start second-guessing everything. Every gift, every phone call, every question that seemed caring at the time. You go back through years of memory and you audit it. That's exhausting. And it doesn't always give you clean answers. What my therapist has helped me understand is that being deceived by someone you loved is not a failure of intelligence. It is a consequence of having loved them genuinely. My perception wasn't flawed. My daughter was. Those are different things. The strength it takes to keep going after something like this is not the loud kind. It's not dramatic. It's just getting up in the morning and making the coffee and walking to the window and choosing, again, to be present in your own life. Some mornings that choice is harder than others. Most mornings now it isn't hard at all. That feels like progress. I'll take it. If there's anything I'd want someone to carry away from all of this, it's 3 things that I've had to earn the hard way. Do what's right even when no one is watching. Walter did, and it cost him nothing except 30 seconds of an awkward conversation, and it saved my life. Pay attention to what your body and your instincts are telling you, even when the people with credentials are telling you something else. And when life breaks something in you, don't just endure it. actually rebuild. Those are different things too. Endurance is survival. Rebuilding is living. I'm 64 years old. I walk the trail on weekends again. The house smells like coffee and old books, and sometimes when the wind comes off the river in a certain way, like the particular kind of October air that I've always loved about Ottawa, that's enough. That's more than enough.